Once upon a time, in a grand and prosperous kingdom, there lived a noble king named Harsh. He was known far and wide for his generosity and kindness. Every morning, as the first golden rays of the sun kissed the earth, King Harsh rode through the streets of his city in a grand chariot, carrying baskets full of food. His hands stretched out, offering bread to the hungry, fruits to the poor, and even leftovers to the stray dogs that roamed the streets. The people adored their king, calling him the protector of the helpless and the guardian of the weak. No beggar in his kingdom ever went to sleep on an empty stomach, and no saint or holy man ever lacked food or shelter. One bright morning, as the king continued his usual routine of feeding the hungry, a cunning minister who rode beside him observed his actions with admiration, or so it seemed. "Your Majesty," the minister said with a smile, "you are the reason these poor creatures survive. Without you they would surely starve. You are their savior, their hope, their protector." The king, though wise, could not help but feel a sense of pride at these words. He looked around, seeing the grateful faces of those who received his offerings, and thought, perhaps it is true. Without me, who would care for them? Just then, a saint who had been sitting nearby burst into laughter. His voice rang clear and free, carrying a sense of deep wisdom. The king turned, surprised. "Oh, wise one," he asked, "why do you laugh?" The saint, still smiling, replied calmly, "Minister's words amuse me, O king. He gives you credit for feeding these beings, but the truth is, it is not you who provides for them, it is the Almighty. You are but a vessel, a medium through which his blessings flow. The real giver is above us." The king furrowed his brows. "Then why do I see them eating from my hands?" he challenged. The saint bowed his head slightly and said, "Because it is written that today, you are their means of sustenance. But remember, when we give, it should be with love, not pride. True kindness comes not from the desire to be praised but from the heart's purest intention. Love is the language all beings understand." The words unsettled the king. He had always believed that his generosity was a sign of his greatness. Did this saint mean to say that his kindness was meaningless? That he was not the true benefactor of his people? His pride was wounded. Determined to prove the saint wrong, the king made a decision. He would stop feeding the hungry for a few days and see what happened. The next morning, King Harsh set out in his chariot as usual, but this time he carried no food. The stray dogs ran to him, their tails wagging, their eyes filled with hope. The beggars lined the streets, expecting his usual generosity. But the king ignored them all. The dogs followed his chariot, their barks turning into soft whimpers. The beggars stretched out their hands, only to lower them in disappointment. The ministers and courtiers exchanged nervous glances but said nothing. Days passed. The once lively dogs grew weaker, their ribs beginning to show. The beggars searched elsewhere for food, but many slept with empty stomachs. The bustling streets of the kingdom felt quieter, as though a shadow had passed over them. Then on the fourth day the king rode past the saint once more. The old man sat beneath a tree, his face calm as ever. The king stopped his chariot and smirked. "Look, saint," he declared, "I have not fed these dogs or these beggars for days. They have become weak just as I expected. Does this not prove that I was the one taking care of them? That it was my hands that kept them from starving?" The saint smiled gently. "Tell me, your Majesty," he said, "have you watched them closely? Have you observed how they have survived?" The king scoffed. "Survived? They are barely alive. A few more days without food and they will surely perish." The saint nodded. "Perhaps. And yet, some have found their way to scraps of food in the alleyways, some have been fed by kind-hearted strangers, and others have shared among themselves. Life and death are in the hands of the divine, O king. If it is written that they must suffer, so be it. But you see, kindness is not about proving oneself. It is about giving selflessly without expecting to be glorified." The king clenched his fists. He would prove the saint wrong. The next morning, King Harsh prepared to ride out once again. This time he carried baskets overflowing with food. He would resume his generosity, but not because of the saint's lesson. No, he wanted to show that he alone had the power to give or withhold. As he rode through the city, a strange thing happened. Midway through his journey, one of the wheels of his chariot suddenly cracked. With a loud snap, the chariot tipped over and the king was thrown to the ground. The baskets tumbled down, spilling food all around him. Pain shot through his body. His head spun, and for a brief moment he lay there, unable to move. Then he heard a sound, a chorus of barks. He turned his head and saw the stray dogs rushing toward him. Fear gripped him. Were they going to attack him? After all, he had abandoned them for days. But to his astonishment, they did not touch the food. Instead, they surrounded him, whining softly. One licked his wounds, another sat beside him as if guarding him. Their eyes, once filled with hunger, now shone with something else, concern. Just then the saint appeared, standing tall beneath the morning sun. He smiled and said, "O king, look. Even in hunger these creatures chose love over food. They care for you not because you fed them but because they feel your presence in their hearts. Today your wealth, your power, and your pride could not protect you. But the love you unknowingly gave has returned to you, shielding you in your moment of weakness." The king's eyes widened. He felt a lump rise in his throat. He had given not out of love but out of pride. He had fed others to feel powerful, to feel superior, not to truly serve them. Tears welled up in his eyes. With great effort, he lifted himself from the ground and bowed before the saint. "I was blind," he said humbly. "I see my mistake now. From this day forward I will give, not to prove my greatness but out of true kindness." From that day on, King Harsh was a changed man. He gave without seeking recognition. He fed not just with his hands but with his heart. His generosity was no longer about proving his importance, but about spreading love and compassion. And as kindness spread, the kingdom flourished. No one slept hungry, not because of the king's power, but because kindness had become a way of life for all. True kindness, the king realized, was not about wealth or status. It was not about pride. It was about love, the kind that expected nothing in return. And in the end, what we share with love always comes back to us in ways we never expect. True kindness does not come from power, wealth, or pride. It comes from the heart. When we give, it should not be to prove our greatness but to spread love. What we share with love will always return to us in unexpected ways.